We need it. Oxygen. It's why we breathe.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Small Biz Stories. And I'm excited today, as I am every week, to bring you our new guests. Today's guest is Dr. Darryl Stickel, PhD from Duke University of Business, no less. So, really, really great expertise here coming at you live to talk about business. And what perfect place, other than Small Biz Stories, to be able to share what he does. He is the founder of Trust Unlimited. He's also an author of a book that has very high ratings related to how you build trust. But one of the most important things that I heard from Dr. Stickel's research and background and what he does, he actually makes it a solution. It's not just talking about trust, but he does things. And there we're totally aligned because I'm all about fix the freaking problem. Dr. Stickel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Please call me Darryl. Um,
Right. I will, Darryl. As I shared with you, I wanted to be called Darryl, but my parents chose Laurelyn. So there we go. Talk to us about a little more about yourself, and you're coming at us live from Victoria, British Columbia. Go ahead.
so I was born and raised in northern British Columbia, which it was a small, isolated community. People had to look out for each other. There was a strong sense of community. We had to pull together. And I got the strong sense that if you could help people, you should. That formed a basis for my sort of approach to the world. Um, I had a series of traumatic incidents when I was growing up that gave me a sense of empathy. And I think a hard road can be a good teacher. And so from that, I developed insights about how to connect with folks. So I worked with troubled teens, with families in crisis, with crisis lines, those kinds of things to further hone those skills. One day I was working with the federal government on native land claims in British Columbia, and they asked me, how do we convince a group of people we've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? And I thought, boy, that is a really good question.
That's a loaded question.
It is. My first response was it would help if we were trustworthy.
Mhm.
That's a hard thing for government to do because it's hard for one government to hold governments that follow it accountable, right? So it's hard to make commitments that are going to last long term for a lot of government.
And it's no coincidence, because I don't believe in coincidence, things happen as they're supposed to happen, that we have two Canadian PhDs talking here now at the very hour that the United States president is about to announce new tariffs, which are going to have a global impact on the economy. And I know all of my Canadian peeps are just spinning and wondering what that means. So, like you said, trust is a very, very difficult thing. So let's roll this back into a couple of things because I do try to avoid some of the politics. I understand
Yeah,
that
of
they play
course.
into everything. Let's talk about, I think, the foundation that you built. So, do you think it's a coincidence or a coincidence? I guess a combination was the word I was searching for. A combination of growing up in a smallish town in Canada, which instilled values of empathy and trust and leaning on each other. Or do you think it was a byproduct of some of the trauma that you experienced? I mean, talk to us about where all of this developed to get you to the place where you are now, teaching and coaching others on trust.
Well, I think it's a combination and it's complex because otherwise everyone from a small town would be an expert on trust and they just aren't, right? And so I grew up with a visual impairment. I knew that I had a degenerative condition that I would eventually go become blind, legally blind. So I had decided I was going to train myself to think for a living, right? So that because I wasn't going to be an airline pilot or, you know, police officer or any of those other careers, I would have to be someone who sold his brain, right, for a living. When I was 17, I was playing hockey. I was playing junior. I got attacked by a fan with a club, shattered my helmet, knocked me unconscious. I had a really severe concussion. That was in 1984. Um,
Jeez.
all of a sudden, for this guy who's planning on thinking for a living, I had the attention span of a fruit fly, right? I couldn't concentrate. I slept all the time. And I felt like I had lost everything, right? And I was captain of my team, but I couldn't play. So the things that had meaning for me were all pulled away. That experience taught me that sometimes things happen to us, but it really matters how we respond. And I would find myself, when I eventually went back to school, went to university, I'd be sitting on the bus in Victoria and some stranger would just come and sit next to me and say, I'm really having a hard time. I wanted to understand why that kept happening. I would notice that people would react differently to me than they would to other people in the same moment. And so I wanted to understand that and understand what was causing it. And when I worked with street kids, people would say, that, we just don't see people connect the way you do with them. What is it that drives that? And part of it's that level of compassion and empathy and that level of understanding of life can be hard. Having someone who's gone through some stuff isn't going to judge, is accepting, and at the same time can be thoughtful. It seemed to be a rare combination. I had this iterative set of experiences where I was going to school and working and going to school and working, just learning these different pieces. Um, and so I ended up having insights that most folks just didn't have. And when I went to Duke to write my doctoral thesis, there were two of the world's leading experts on trust there at the time. After I finished, they sat me down and they said, you know what, Darryl, when you first came to us, we thought too big, too complicated. He never solves it. We'll give him 6 months. He'll come crawling back. He'll chisel off a little piece of it and it'll be his thesis. They said 6 months in, we couldn't help anymore. All we could do was sit and watch. And here we are a couple of years later. We think you've solved it. And so there was something about those collective experiences, my perspective, that gave me insight that wasn't common. I spent the last 20 years of my life applying that model, helping people better understand what trust is and how it works, and most importantly, how to build it, how to make better lives for themselves.
So let's talk about how you've taken this foundation now and evolved it for application with small businesses, right? How trust building, it's crucial for innovation. How
Yeah.
leaders, you talked about government, but let's talk about business leaders, how they fail at building trust. All of this, talk about how everything you've learned and what you apply and coach others on is relevant to our small business audience who's listening now.
Yeah. Let's think about your audience, our audience for this moment. And small businesses are pushed and pulled by the winds of fate, right?
Yes.
Giants sneeze and they catch cold. While egos are being flexed and tariffs are being imposed, and I'm not going to talk about all the political stuff, but it has profound implications for small businesses because the environment is so uncertain. I think that, as a leader, the more senior you become, the less direct control you have over outcomes, the more you rely and depend on those you lead to reach your goals and objectives. As a small business, one of the few things you control is the relationships you build with your customers, with your employees, with your investors. Main ability to build a safe harbor is your ability to build relationships with those around you that will drive success and make you more resilient. So we've seen research show us that from the one-on-one relationships to teams to organizations of any size, trust has a profoundly positive impact on bottom line performance. One of the things that tends to get in our way is this belief that we can't do anything about it, that it's either present or absent, that we don't have control over it, but we can be so intentional about it. And that's what I try to teach people is, there's things you can actually do to make a difference.
Let's talk about the very provocative question that you ask through your book and then in your work and everything that you're doing and working with other business owners. How do you know if you're trusted? Are there key metrics? Are there ways that small business owners can say, I heard this podcast by Dr. Stickel of Trust Unlimited, and I'm thinking, I wonder, I think I'm trusted by my customers. I think I'm trusted by my staff, but do I really know? Talk to us about how we can tap into that and unpack it for us.
That's a great question, Laureline, because one of the
I like
reasons we
asking
don't
great
have,
questions.
yeah, well, you're nailing it so far. One of the main reasons we don't have more trust is because 95% of people believe they're more trustworthy than average.
Hmm.
And that's not only statistically impossible, it's damaging because when something goes wrong between you and I, if I'm sitting there thinking, well, it's not me, you've got to pull up your socks, you've got to fix things, and you're thinking the same thing, how likely is it that things get better? They don't. Yeah.
Zero. Donuts.
So
Tim Hortons.
when, yes,
Not Duncan.
yes, exactly. So a lot of times what we try to talk people through is this self-awareness about, and I'll ask that question, who do you trust? I get these close, tight personal relationships like best friend, sibling, spouse, parents.
Mhm.
And the reality is we trust people all the time, right? When we go to a restaurant, when we get in a cab, when we get on an airplane, you go see a doctor, you don't know those people individually, but you trust them. And when I flip the question and say, who trusts you? I get this really long pause. And then people say, well, how would I know? And it's exactly the question you're asking, which trust is the willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. If we want to know if someone trusts us, we ask ourselves, how could they make themselves vulnerable to me? And then do they? So if I'm a leader, do my people tell me the bad news first? Do they tell me what their real development needs are? Do they come to me and ask for help or admit that they don't know things? Do they push back against ideas that they don't think are going to work? Do they take chances? Or are they very cautious? These are all ways we can look to see, do people trust me? One of my friends was at one of my workshops, my friend Kevin Doyle. And I said to him, Kevin, do you trust me? And he said, yeah, of course, Darryl. I said, can I borrow your car? Now, Kevin has
Wow.
a nice car, right? It's a Porsche. And I said,
Very
look,
nice.
before you answer, I know it's Toronto in the middle of winter and it's a blizzard. There's a blizzard outside. So road conditions are not great. And I know that I'm legally blind. I can't actually see out the front windshield. But in the words of Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, I really am an excellent driver. And I said, so can I borrow your car? And he goes, no. And I said, so what just happened here? I asked you if you trust me. You said yes. But then I asked you to make yourself vulnerable to me and you say no. We trust people at different levels and with different things. And a lot of the research treats trust like it's a dichotomous variable, like it's present or absent. And in reality, it's like a dimmer switch. We trust some people more than others. We trust people in certain places and not others. Now, I know that David or that Kevin trusts me because he has me over to his house. I've met his family, his kids. We have deep, meaningful conversations. And at the break, he actually came up to me and said, I'm really uncomfortable with this. And I think
Hmm.
I've got a solution. Let's go to the salt flats and you can drive my car. He said, I'm more worried about you than the car. That's my source of vulnerability. Yeah, he's a sweetheart. We don't always know who we trust until we reach a spot where we go, oh, not there. So we've got this lack of self-awareness, and we don't always know who trusts us or how much or in which settings until they display it. So asking people isn't really the best way to go, right? Because they don't really know. And so we need to observe behavior. We need to see them engaged in collaborative behavior. We need to see them asking for help. We need to see them admitting that they've made a mistake. Those kinds of things to know that they trust us.
Is it a matter of we take trust for granted? Maybe I'm oversimplifying things, recognize that, right? This is part of the interesting part of the
Sure.
conversation that we just all come to the table and sort of trust is expected and we expect it to be bilateral. And then it's, we think that it is until we learn that it's not. And it's only at
Right.
that moment, right, where we've hit that threshold where we've realized we've asked for too much or that what we've asked for we don't think is that much, but we're getting pushback on it. And we're like, wait a minute, I thought you trusted me, that it raises the
Yeah.
flag that says, now I actually need to think about trust as a dynamic in our relationship. Is that kind of what happens?
Yeah. Like I think of trust as sort of a living thing. It gets, stronger and weaker over time, and it can ebb and flow in our relationships. A lot of times, you're right. We just take it for granted. We just assume. And we don't really take a lot of time to think about the other person. So for me, trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. And I think of it as sort of two bar graphs. So uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. And we each have a threshold of risk that we can tolerate. If we're beneath that threshold, then we trust. If we're beyond it, we don't. So in early relationships, uncertainty is really high, means we can only tolerate a small range of vulnerability. And as that relationship gets deeper, our perception of the uncertainty declines, and the range of vulnerability we can tolerate starts to grow. In our deepest relationships, we have this tiny sliver of uncertainty and this huge range of vulnerability we can tolerate and still fit beneath that threshold. But things come along and cause us to become more uncertain over time until we've addressed them. And if we're looking at what's going on in the world right now, we're seeing massive fluctuations in uncertainty.
Mhm.
Trust levels are the lowest we've ever seen. And it's because uncertainty is so high. We have a hard time minimizing our own level of vulnerability. Like if we're at work, you've got employees that are working for you, they have to pay their bills. Part of their sense of self is embedded in the work that they do. They have relationships with other people at work and with clients, and they've got things going on in the other parts of their lives, maybe families, kids, those kinds of things that they're responsible for. So their vulnerability is pretty stable, but the uncertainty is bouncing all over the place. And when we ask them to trust us, we're asking them to be just a little bit more vulnerable. And sometimes that's a really hard ask.
If we flip it around in that equation and look at it where now I'm thinking of like from a personal example, but then ready to apply it to business. So where those of us that have had relationships where we had deep, deep knowledge, like intimate
Yeah.
relationships. I'm talking about even in my case, an ex-husband and my
Hmm.
entire family that violated my trust. So that puts me in a different place with respect to, I'm extra nudgy about who I trust at all. I've
Yeah.
had multiple opportunities where I've tried to engage with potential business partners. And at the end of it, I'm exhausted, depleted, and fully exploited. So you get the brain pick and then they move on, like, oh, we're going to go do that. Those are some great ideas, Laurelyn. And then they go off on their own. So,
Right.
how do you advise small business owners today in this era of really unprecedented uncertainty, how to
Yeah.
move forward with respect to trust?
I used to get in arguments with my kids, right? They would have a tantrum about something, and the thought would occur to me, one of us is going to have to be the adult. And
Was it always you?
not always. I
Yeah.
have to say, often they would be like, okay, Dad, sorry about what just happened. My bad. Part of the challenge for us is figuring out how to initiate a trust cycle. I have a podcast called The Imperfect Cafe. We talk about leading with imperfections. So sometimes it requires us to go first and be a little bit vulnerable first. And that doesn't mean opening the kimono and telling everyone all your pain because that'll scare them off and they will feel like they can't reciprocate, right? Imagine
You can't hold it.
you and I were out for dinner and I said, well, how do you feel about more kids? I'm up for getting married. I know we've known each other for 15 minutes, but next week's open for me, right? Those
Right.
kinds those kinds of things scare people, right? And they feel not only like, hey, I don't want that weight, but I can't reciprocate at that level yet. But small things like I'm struggling to figure out how to motivate my employees, how to get them engaged. And there's a Gallup poll out that says that 80% or 70% of employees are disengaged at work. How do I
Mhm.
motivate people? Right? So acknowledging you don't have all the answers. I know that if my employees are motivated and happy, that their exchanges or engagement with their clients is going to be better. How do I get them to have the same feeling of ownership for this organization that I do?
Bingo.
Right? So asking those kinds of questions and talking with your clients saying, look, the world's a scary place. And when the world starts to break down, when larger scale communities start to break down, we have to be more focused on immediate community. and I've got a small business that serves this local community. How do I get the word out? How do I serve your needs better? How do I become a better option for you so that you choose me instead of some chain or some international organization for the needs that you have? And how do I get you to tell me what those needs are? Right? So starting off with that small bit of vulnerability that initiates a norm of response of reciprocity, where people say, okay, you've been a bit open with me, I'm going to be a bit open with you. I think one of the most powerful levers is I think of this as 10 levers we can use to build trust. One of them is benevolence, having someone's best interest at heart. Understanding as a small business that you need to focus on the best interests of your customers and you need to focus on the best interests of your employees because that's the way to achieve success for yourself. That finding the overlap between your best interests, articulating that, and then showing them that you've got their back in the most powerful, positive way you can, a way that's transparent, starts to build positive relationships, starts to build trust.
What else can small business owners do today? And I'm especially interested because I speak to a lot of business owners through this podcast and through my consulting practice and business and whatnot. People know, small business owners know that they need to do something different. They
Right.
might be having a challenge with revenue growth or with employee retention or insert whatever the business challenge is. And they go online and there's a lot of snake oil, right, being sold out there. Hey, do this, do that. Watch
Yeah.
my webinar for 58 minutes. And then at minute 59, I'm going to show you if you click right here, you'll get the magic solution, right? So there's a lot of need, but distrust. How can you guide people to navigate, like give them some tools to better sniff out where that sounds a little snake oily, like that's not so trustworthy, or that's not really a
Right.
potentially good person. How would you advise your clients to sniff that
So
out?
if they just send me their credit card number, I could no.
Brilliant, brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant.
No, I have a lot of stuff on my website that's free at trustunlimited.com. And we talk about how we create deeper relationships because my passion is about getting the signal through the noise,
Mm,
raising awareness. I talk to senior academics and they go, good Lord, you are decades ahead of the field. But I talk to real people and I show them the model that I use. And you can find it for free in my blog on my website. Um, and I'm talking about it here. When you start to actually become intentional about building stronger relationships, it means that you generate more referrals. It means that you increase employee engagement. It means that you have people going above and beyond. And a lot of times, what we in business talk about is organizational citizenship behaviors. You want to create an environment where people feel like they want to go above and beyond, not just for the company, but for the clients. Right now, it feels, particularly for younger members of the workforce, like the social contract has been broken, like they're not being treated fairly by large organizations. We hear a lot of billionaires saying, you all need to just work harder so I can make more money. Um,
right.
and so, how do we engage that workforce to feel like they're benefiting from their experience? And partly that means I start teaching them things that are beneficial to them, that are an investment in them early. I show that I have care and concern for their career, their development, their growth. I appeal to their better nature and show them mine. A lot of the literature focuses on sort of three levers, and those are benevolence, which is having someone's best interest at heart, integrity, which is do I follow through on my values? Like, do my actions line up with the words I'm saying? And do I follow through on my promises? Ability. Do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And a lot of times we make assumptions and we forget that it doesn't matter if I think I'm doing those things. It matters if you think I'm doing those things.
Mhm.
Right. And so my aspiration is to be one of the best podcast guests you've ever had. but I
You've
can't
been
do
great
that
so
without
far.
asking. Well, thank you. And so what would be awesome is if you could tell me what the pieces are that are missing, anything I could do to even heighten that. And wow, would it be cool if we could ask your listeners what would make it so that Darryl was the best guest I ever heard? Because they're the ones who help us define what excellence actually is. I don't get to do that on my own. What I try to do when I give talks like this is not only talk about the model and the impacts, but I'll give specific tips. So if your listeners would like to show someone, try to pull the benevolence lever to show someone they have their best interest at heart, here's the conversation they can have. They can start off by saying, I heard this guy Darryl, he was talking about trust. And he said benevolence really matters. That's just a big fancy word that means having someone's back, having their best interest at heart. And I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that? And the other person, 99% of the time, will say, yes, I have. And then you get curious about that. Well, what did you try? How did it work out? And here's some of the things that I tried in the past that really landed flat. And then you narrow the funnel and you say, has someone ever really had your back? What did they do? How did it feel? Now I'm getting hints, right? And I'm priming you for the rest of the conversation. You're starting to think about someone who really looked out for you. You talked about some people taking advantage and betraying your trust, but I bet if I asked, there'd be some stories you have about people who really looked out for you.
Absolutely. I've got my Northern Ontario posse. We all take care of each other.
Yeah, there you
They're
go.
fabulous. My chosen family. Wonderful.
Yeah, okay. And so if we start to dig in and say, well, what is it that they do? Well, they're probably curious about you. They probably, you know,
Mhm.
think about you when you're not there. They they talk about things that matter to you or reference things that they've come across that matter to you. These are all ways that they show that they've got your best interest at heart.
That's right.
Let's narrow it even further. What would it look like if I had your back? What does success mean to you? How do I help you get there? And now once you've told me that, I've got the ability to be transparent about it in the future. To say, Laurelyn, you told me that having positive impact for your listeners is really important to you. It's one of the ways that you
Yes.
drive success. Here's some research I came across that they might be interested in. And I was thinking about you. And now all of a sudden, we don't miss each other, right? We interpret the world through stories. And if you hear my benevolence and see it and have me frame it that way, it's much harder for you to misinterpret.
Oh, spot on. And the relevant example hit 24 hours ago. A former client who I haven't done business with in a long time, I came across an article on Popular Mechanics, I know, about reversing gravity. Not even my field, but that's his field. And I thought, wow, this is so out there. And it's such a rare thing. And I thought, what was his name? What was his name? And then I grabbed the link, sent it to him, and said, here's some thoughts and that on it. Not looking and fishing for, hey, more business, just it's such a weird thing. Again, like I said, I don't believe in
Yeah.
coincidence. It was there. And I reached out and said, here, here's a link, take a look. And he's like, oh my goodness, I'm so grateful you did this. I've been thinking about, like, I'm having a hard time. I've been thinking about what to do next in my business and where to go and with the challenges I'm facing in my research. And this article's, so you never know. You get guided, right? And then it's because there's some level of trust that you build, but it takes both
Yeah.
sides working at it, right? And
It
just as I
it
would ask
does.
you, how can I, earn your trust, right? And build this out and let people know about your wonderful book. People can buy it on Amazon, Darryl Stickel, on
Right.
trust and building trusted relationships, trustunlimited.com. And there's so much more to this. But the challenge is people are also really limited on time. So
Yeah.
with podcasts like this, I could talk to you for hours, but we won't have people listening for hours. What we want to do here in the next couple of minutes is, as we drive to a wrap, is get people to go look. go be curious, explore more, trustunlimited.com. As I said, you've got all kinds of free goodies there, your blog, lots of information, and people can get in contact with you if they want to learn more. But
Right.
as we wrap, a couple of just fun and little silly questions. So you
Sure.
did your PhD at Duke, best doors of in any college around the world. I love all their doors. I have tons and tons of photographs. But my question is, Cosmic Cantina?
Oh, the burritos. Yes, fantastic.
Yes, right?
They used to deliver to the business school. They would deliver dozens of burritos that were kept in a warmer. And so I used to have them for lunch all the time.
I love that place. They had like burritos bigger than your head. I was always terrified to go on the deck though, which they finally just rebuilt because I thought this is so unsafe. And last question as we wrap up the podcast. This is my signature question. Now, if we looked into your shoes, right, and at your in your closet and looked at the shoes you have, describe the pair of shoes that personifies who you are. Best represents your personality, your values.
Mm.
Describe that footwear to us. What are we looking at, Darryl?
Something that's really comfortable, because that's my first priority, and
Mhm.
flexible. I have a pair of brown walking shoes that can that I can move faster in if I need to. They're extremely comfortable. They're not overly dressy, but that's me. I'm a kind of humble, down to earth guy and apply the model everywhere, right? And so I help people talk about small business or about family or about, right now we're doing some work on mental health and helping young men
Right.
figure out how to be more resilient. Um, but at the same time, we've worked with finance, heavy industry, government, nonprofit. We, so I'm a little bit everywhere because trust is a problem that presents itself all
Yeah.
over the place.
That's right. Personally and professionally. Parting thoughts. You got about 30 seconds. What would you like to tell our audience?
I like to say that trust is one of the primary drivers of your success. You can be intentional about it. There are things you can do about it. Start looking at the website. It's free, low barriers to entry. Reach out if you want to Darryl at trustunlimited.com. And I'm just hopeful that I'm helpful.
I think you've been enormously helpful. And even just some of the keywords and things, I sign off in my signature, be intentional, because that's what you have to be. You have to be deliberate about the things that you do. And if you're
Yeah.
not, so with that, Dr. Stickel, thank you so much for being on our show today. We are really grateful that you took time coming in from Victoria, British Columbia, to talk to us about how you build trust, which levers that you pull, and different ways that you can go about exploring how to build a more trustworthy relationship with your employees, with your business partners, and even at the level of personal level. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and I wish everyone the best.
And how about that fantastic intro by Touch Circle?